My name is Cynthia Simons, and I'm a person who has experienced family separation. I graduated from high school when I was 15 years old, and I had aspirations of becoming an attorney. I had my first child at 18. I had my second child by the time I was 21 years old. I had dropped out of college and I began surviving. I came from a community where there were very little supports and there were very little wraparound services. When I ended up in a relationship that ended up being a domestic violence relationship. And after about 8 years, I finally got the strength to leave. And the places that I went to ask for help, where you traditionally think that you can get supportive services for food, housing instability, clothing, different challenges that you may be having as a parent, were the same entities that ended up building a case against me. What I was actually doing was sharing my vulnerabilities and the things that me and my family needed, me and my children needed, and they were being weaponized. Those things were later used against me, and it was a case built against me in order to remove my children from me. Children, young girls, myself, I was indoctrinated with being a mother and a caretaker from the time that I was 2 or 3 years old. When my children were ripped away from me by the Department of Family and Protective Services, it was devastating. I do not think that I was actively trying to commit suicide, but I will say that I was not actively trying to live. I do not know that I considered myself a full person. The ramifications of family separation plagued my family, and they plague families that are in marginalized communities. They disproportionately impact Black families. My family was no exception. The consequences of family separation still ravish my family. My son has been with me for less than 2 months, and he has graduated and gotten his GED. He was separated from me for 4 to 5 years and never had anything more than a consistent week or two of healthy outcomes in school. So I think that elevates the power and the impact that birth parents have on their children if there had just been a little bit of support in the community.
So I'm here to share a little bit about my story. At the age of 20, I was pregnant, I was raped, I was beaten, I was sent to prison for 75 years on a first offense. I had one child before incarceration. He was 5 years old. So during my incarceration, my pregnancy was rough. I slept on a steel cot with a super thin mattress. They gave all pregnant women prenatal vitamins. They gave updated doctor's appointments. The difference is that each time I went to a doctor's appointment, I was shackled. I was shackled at my waist, just below my belly, and I was also shackled at my feet to be transported to the doctor's appointment. That was a horrible experience for me as a pregnant woman, especially when I went into labor. When I went into labor, it was really funny because I was sitting playing cards with other people, and I went and told the doctor that I'm in labor, and they didn't believe me because I wasn't in a lot of pain. At the hospital, they took me out to a regular hospital in the community where I had my child. I was there for 3 days, and I was told that I had to leave my unborn child in the hospital, that I had no clue when my sister was going to arrive to pick her up. I will say in that process that one of the questions the counselor had asked of me was to sign papers to give my child to CPS because I had an extensive amount of time. I told her I wouldn't do that I would have a family member that would agree to come and get my child from the hospital. The day that I was scheduled to come back, 3 days later, my sister had not arrived. And the prison continued to call and enforce that I come back and leave my child, the only Black baby, alone in the hospital. I didn't do it. I forced myself to stay in the bathroom until my sister arrived so that I know for sure that my sister was taking my child from that hospital and that CPS was not coming to get my child. During my incarceration, it was very difficult to have a relationship with my children because it was super expensive for them to travel from one state to another state just to visit me for roughly 3 hours each visit. So it was extremely hard. There was one program while inside, and it was a summer program that allowed mothers to camp with their children over the weekend, starting on a Friday and ending on a Sunday. Your family had to make sure that your child arrived at the arrival time and make sure they also came and picked up your child. It was during this time that I felt the most closest to my child and bonding opportunity with my child. Other than that, it wasn't every weekend or every once a month opportunity to have time and space with my child. Another reason why it was difficult is everyone is strip searched when they come for a visitation. I also didn't want to continue to add that trauma onto my children by being strip searched for a visitation. When I say strip search, I mean the child with a guard, a male or female, depending on the sex of the child, would also have to go in the room, take off their clothes, be touched, and asked to be in the squad just as we did. I thought that was super humiliating and traumatizing for my children. So I honestly didn't want to see them as much because I didn't want to send them through that trauma. I already was causing trauma on my kids by being separated from them. I know that my separation has affected my children on so many levels. Because my son, let's talk about him first. Early on, they continued to want to diagnose my child with some type of depression, with ADHD, and they put him on all kind of medication at a young age. I didn't think it was necessary, but there was nothing I could say or do while incarcerated because he was under the care of my mom. To this day, I still think my son and my daughter, who I had while incarceration, have separation anxieties. I also feel that it is difficult for us to have a real open and honest relationship because so much time has passed and so much harm has been caused through the separation. Today, my kids are adults. I still see the remnants of my incarceration during the 20 years that I was gone. I cannot replace that time. I cannot go back in their childhood, and talk about things that, happened when they were 6 or 12 years old while I was incarcerated, because I also know that that's drumming up more trauma for them to actually have to relive through any of those experiences while incarcerated. Today we do have a relationship, but it's very difficult. My kids were grown when I was released from prison. I can't go back and relive those 20 years that I had spent away from my children. I can only start from the day that I was released. I do think that there is a separation of mom and friend between my kids because they wasn't raised by me, because they learned of my behavior, who I was as a parent in their adult life. So it has been very challenging for me to get my kids to move past the fact that they created this image of a mom, and then I come out and I'm not the image that they created. So I feel that there's a constant battle and a barrier that we are constantly trying to get over, those humps we're trying to get over because of my incarceration. When I returned to society, I can't say that I needed a program because, again, my daughter had just graduated from college and my son at that time was in prison. So I just basically had to go from like day one, explaining that I'm home, here we are, and how can we move forward? I couldn't change anything of the past with them. I can only try to minimize the trauma and the pain that occurred with them while I was incarcerated. I would say today that family separation is traumatizing all within itself. I deal daily with family separation on the immigration side, and as well as folks that are being incarcerated. And to see the pain on the children's face and not knowing or understanding why their mom or dad was just whisked away from them and they would no longer see them is very traumatizing. There are very little programs out today that will be able to build that bond between a mother and a parent, a mother and a child once they have been separated. What I feel is more resources need to be poured into the community or into the families that are beholding of these children while their parents are incarcerated, so that they will be able to have the needed resources that they need to be able to have that child visit the parent as much as they can while they are incarcerated. It's super, super important that we have programs and practices in place that will help with family reunification. One of the biggest barriers is the fact that once you remove a child and you place a child in another home and you bring that child back to be with his parents, it's a learning curve all over again. There's not enough resources poured into these family reunification programs that are actually beneficial for the child. I think the child also needs to have some type of therapy because they have to learn who their parent is all over again. It's going to be a shock to that child when their parent come home and try to parent them. So I do think there needs to be some components of therapy with the child as well as with the parent when they come home, because right now when folks are released from prison and their children are placed back with them, it's just put back together. There's not what I say a cushion to actually walk the child and the parent through, because they both have to learn each other all over again. So funding and community for reunification, family reunification, is highly important for the child to be able to develop a sense of trust and a sense of bonding with their parent after they've been separated for a long time. When children are separated from their parents, we have to realize that we as society are placing harm on that kid. And we have to do all that we have to do in order to make sure that this kid will be okay while the parent is gone, and especially when the parent gets back home. There needs to be like true programs like therapy, counseling, child play therapy with a counselor and with the parent as well.